Good Wednesday morning. This is Pastor Mark Pierce from Church Requel, here for Bible study number 117 on this April the 29th. Today we're going to talk about swearing a vow. Yes, that's right. We are absolutely moving on from the topic we've been on for the last week and a half. We're not going to stay on Matthew 31 and 32 forever. We actually are moving on. Before we get to our Bible study, however, I just want to give you an idea of where we are at. Behind me is the Clear Fork Reservoir. It's just south of my home in Mansfield. It's where a lot of fishing and boating takes place. It's quite a nice recreational area. It's a little bit early for that here, but it is such a gorgeous spring day. I absolutely had to get outside and share this Bible study with you today. Well, take your Bibles and turn to Matthew chapter 5, verse 33 and 37. 33 through 37, I should say. And let me just read Jesus' teaching to you. Reads this way. Again, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. But I say to you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil, or possibly translated from the evil one. Now today, we're not going to get to all those verses. We're going to do this over probably a 3-day period of time. But today, we are going to take a look at that very first verse, Matthew chapter 5, verse 33, where Jesus says, again, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. This actually is a composite of 3 different Old Testament verses. You won't find any one exactly the same as what Jesus has given us in Matthew chapter 5. But if you want to, you could take your Bibles and turn to 3 different books from the Torah, Leviticus, and then Numbers, and then Deuteronomy. Let me just read these for you and give you some sense of what the Old Testament has to say on this topic of swearing. Leviticus 19:12 reads this way, you shall not swear by my name falsely, and so profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. Or this from Numbers 32, that's chapter 30, verse 2. If a man vows a vow to the Lord, or swears an oath to bind himself by a pledge, he shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth. And then we have this from Deuteronomy chapter 23, verse 21. If you make a vow to the Lord your God, you shall not delay fulfilling it, for the Lord your God will surely require it of you, and you will be guilty of sin. So the idea that we have from the Old Testament is not that you should never swear. The idea is that if you swear a vow, then you better make sure that you keep your word. And actually, we see many examples of this in the Old Testament. Just to name a few very quickly, we see, for example, Abraham swears a vow to the king of Sodom in Genesis chapter 14, verses 22 to 24. We also see Abraham's servant, Eliezer, swearing that he would not get a wife for Isaac from any of the Canaanite women in Genesis chapter 24. We also see Jacob and Laban in Genesis 31, where Jacob swears that he will not take other wives and will not mistreat the daughters of Laban. We even see this between David and Jonathan, where in 1 Samuel chapter 20, verse 16, where Jonathan says, may the Lord take vengeance on David's enemies. And even David himself, in one of the Psalms, we see the fact that Psalm 132, verse 2, reads this way, David swore to the Lord and vowed to the mighty one of Jacob. In fact, as astounding as this seems, there are places in the Old Testament where the Lord actually swears his promise by his own name. For there's nothing more than God can swear by than by himself. In fact, the writer to Hebrews explains this in Hebrews chapter 6, verse 13. For when God made a promise to Abraham, since he had no one greater by whom to swear, he swore by himself. Now, we might just first ask the question, why would anyone swear to begin with? What's the importance of swearing? Why swear an oath? Well, basically, again, as the Hebrew writers explains, people swear by something greater than themselves, and in all their disputes, an oath is final for confirmation. In other words, by swearing, there is this idea that I can say something and give it greater weight, a greater sense of assuring someone else that it will come to pass. Hold on just a second. I just dropped my note. Now you can see that I actually do this live and don't pre-record this or take multiple takes on it. We'll just keep right on going where we were. So again, the Hebrew writer explains that people swear by something greater than themselves. It gives a greater weight to somebody's words. So why would Jesus be addressing this in his famous Sermon on the Mount? Well, it's possible by looking at Jesus' words that there might have been two different kinds of swearing going on that Jesus wanted to address. The first kind of swearing might be what we would call frivolous swearing, where someone is taking an oath where no oath was really necessary or even proper to take. It might be common, for example, to say, I swear by my life, or I swear by my head, or may I never see the comfort of Israel if, and go on to say it. There is this sense of taking sacred language and using it in a most meaningless way. And certainly Jesus would have been against that. But there's also this idea beyond frivolous swearing of this idea of something called evasive swearing. Evasive swearing. Now, I have to explain this to you just a little bit. You see, the Jewish people of Jesus' day divided their oaths into two kinds of classes. The first class was an oath that contained the name of God. And if you swore an oath that contained the name of God, then that oath was absolutely binding upon you. But there was a second class of oath, and this was an oath that was made without a specific reference to God. Again, they went back to these Old Testament teachings where it says if a man vows a vow to the Lord, in other words, using God's name, then it was absolutely binding. But if you didn't have God's name in it, then it might not be binding. And so they would swear in this second class of oaths. They would swear without a specific reference to God, but something that would seem to reference God. In other words, I swear by heaven, or I swear by earth, or I swear by Jerusalem. And the idea would be that if I did one of these kind of oaths, well, then it's not absolutely binding, and I can break that oath. Again, the sense would be that in the first kind of oath that included God's name, that God would be a partner in some way or another in that transaction. Where in the second kind of oath, God would not be a partner because his name was not used. Well, Jesus surely takes exception to this. He's basically saying no man can keep God out of any transaction. And I want to talk more to you about what Jesus has to say, but we're out of time today. So you stay tuned, and we'll talk more about oaths when we come back tomorrow.